Hello friends and spiritual seekers. So this video is recorded a little differently. My roommates were also recording when I had time to record my video, so I'm gonna have to just do a voiceover. That is what it is. I wanted to try out this kind of format anyway, so I mean it kind of worked out, I guess. But anyway, in this video, we're going to be talking about shadow work, and more specifically, why is everybody talking about it all of a sudden? Shadow work has been an idea for decades. It's been integrated into witchcraft in one form or another as part of practice, again, for many years. It's obviously fluctuated in popularity, and you kind of like see it here and there, different practitioners, different people online, for example, talking about it, but it's never been like a hot topic. But recently, since 2020, it's been a hot topic. I see it popping up everywhere, like lots of YouTube videos, TikToks, like etc. I've just seen it all over the place. And I'm just like, I'm kind of annoyed because it's like this has been a thing for a long time. And why all of a sudden is it so popular? So we're going to explore that. But before we explore that, let's talk about what shadow work is and how it comes about. So before talking about shadow work, we need to talk about the shadow self because that's what it's all based on. The shadow self was first written by slash popularized slash was developed by Carl Jung. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. Above that, he had, he was an artist. He did different work in fields of literature and things like that. He all has founded many branches of psychiatry, like different forms of psychiatry care, and has been very influential in the fields of psychiatry overall, anthropology, literature, and religious studies. Now, from going to the shadow self, he had written about the shadow. I tried to find an original source, but it seems like he wrote about it over many different literature articles and over many books and different publications. So there's no like one solid source of where he first started kind of talking about it. Jung stated the shadow to be the unknown dark side of the personality. According to Jung, the shadow, in being instinctive and irrational, is prone to psychological projection, in which a perceived personal superiority is recognized as a perceived moral deficiency in someone else. Jung writes that if these projections remain hidden, the projection making factor, the shadow archetype, then has a free hand and can realize its object, if it has one, or bring about some other situation characteristic of its power. So the shadow, in the very like basic terms, is the dark side of ourselves. And this is what I'm doing my makeup on. This is what I visualize my shadow self as its own kind of entity. And part of knowing that you have that shadow, it is your unconsciousness. And when we talk about our unconsciousness, we think about our unconscious biases, unconscious attitudes and beliefs and morals that affect us in our day-to-day lives and how we interact with our world that we're not fully consciously aware of that we do it. All right. And so when we think of our shadow, I personally think of it as this kind of separate entity, but that separate entity isn't outside of yourself. It is a part of your being. It is a part of your whole personality. Because I've done so much work with it, I feel like I have it, like I can put it in the corner. You know what I mean? I know it's there. I know it's trying to, have an effect on what I'm doing, but I can kind of like put it back in the corner. I recognize it. I see you. But I need you to, stay in your corner right now. So the shadow self is something that you definitely should work on integrating, because the only way to control and change the way you interact subconsciously is to recognize that it's there and to recognize that it's a part of yourself. It's not this just bad ideas or things that, you think of that you're not supposed to say, well, I don't really think like that. Well, you do. If you're thinking it, you do think like that. You know what I mean? So part of working with your shadow and working with your subconscious on really recognizing your full personality is by doing Shadow work. So shadow work in its basic definition is just working on making the subconscious conscious, because we don't have full control on what we do or what we think if it's not conscious. The subconscious is like a toddler running in the background. You have no idea what they're doing, and it's just like a toddler. If they're making noise, you can kind of know what's going on, but if they're quiet, you have no idea what they're getting into, and you know that it ain't good. So we need to bring that toddler into our consciousness and really take control of it, to be able to change on how it makes us interact with other people, how it makes us interact with our environment and different aspects of our life. And so we can really move forward with a full consciousness of ourselves and how we want to interact and portray ourselves essentially, into the world. So to give some examples of how the shadow self can affect you, I'm going to talk about some Carl Jung quotes. So I'm going to use some of his quotes and just kind of give an example of how that would look like in the real world, like practically. So the first quote is, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This is a very powerful quote because it talks about two aspects of how the shadow portrays itself or presents itself in a practical sense. So the first one about a man not going through the inferno of his passions. So this is when we take our passions and things that we are very passionate about and putting them in the background. This can be seen in two different ways. Either we just don't do them out of fear of judgment, out of fear of that we're not going to be able to accomplish it or something like that, but it's always fear-based on why we put those things in the back burner or just pretend that they don't exist at all. We shove it back into the subconscious, saying this is not what I really want because we are supposed to want what society says we want, or our parents, or our colleagues, our peers, etc. So we kind of shove those passions into the background. Another part of this is when a person is too enveloped or too consumed by their passion. Sometimes this can present as addiction. So this is when you don't work on what you need to work on psychologically, and so you find a passion, not necessarily a healthy one, that you just get consumed by. And the way to get out of this, and so like I've never been severely addicted to alcohol or drugs, just saying that, but I know I've witnessed a lot of addiction. I know people who have gone through addiction recovery, and from my experience, what I've heard time and time again from these people in different forms is that you really need to work through why you are gravitating towards this addiction. Why are you consumed? What are you trying to hide? Like, what are you trying to hide? What are you trying to cover up? What are you trying to ignore? You're using, or sorry, not you, but it seems like the overall theme is that they're using the addiction to keep whatever that inferno, that anger, that fire, that sadness in the subconscious. They don't want to go into the subconscious, and they use that addiction method as a way to keep that into the background, and they don't have to deal with it. So if you don't deal with it, you can never overcome it. You have to go through the fire, you have to go through the pain to get to the other side, to kindle a light in the darkness. And that's what's going to lead you to a more whole being. The next quote is, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people." This goes hand in hand on how we project our anger and our, like, what we hate about ourselves and what's in our shadow. We project it on others, which is very interesting because a part of shadow work, and very easy part of shadow work, is seeing how you judge other people. This is the easiest way to recognize when your shadow is trying to come out is when you're judging people on anything, on any aspect, but especially if it's a personality trait of that person, because there is a good chance that the reason you're judging that person is because subconsciously you are like that. You may not project it consciously because, well, you aren't, because you shoved it back into your shadow, but subconsciously, this is a part of your personality that you are ignoring and rejecting. So it tries to force its way out, and this is in the form of judging others. So I find this a very interesting aspect because we all know those people who do nothing but judge other people. They're just negative all the time. All they do is talk shit about people. And it's just like, I find it very interesting from an outside perspective now that I just like, oh, this is your shadow, very, very strongly coming out. And in my experience, is the stronger their like shadow is coming out is because of the more that's rejected. So like, I actually feel sorry for these people now because they have no idea. They have no aspect on who they are because all they're doing is projecting their shadow, which means consciously they have no idea who they are. They have no sense of self, which I can't imagine. I can't imagine that. You know what I mean? I've come so far to have this like full understanding of myself that it must be just scary to not know, you know, yourself at all, just have no sense of self. So that's one major aspect of the shadow and how it presents itself. The last quote I'm going to use is, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness, and the word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness." This is an interesting quote because I find in modern spirituality, they do not say this, right? Do your meditations, do your affirmations, do your manifestations, and everything will be great. You're going to get everything you want, and life is just going to be so fucking awesome. And it's like, hello, if you have nothing but good, then there's nothing to balance it. It'll be neutral because there's nothing to compare it to. There's nothing to balance it. You need to have that balance of good and evil, you know, positive, negative, whatever terms you want to use to balance it all out. The positive doesn't mean anything without the negative. And this is something that I find is very lost in modern spirituality movements and different aspects. I'm kind of getting tired of the rhetoric a little bit because I get it. Like, I understand the love and light kind of thing. I get the purpose of it. I get that people eat that shit up because they want to ignore, people want to ignore the fact that they have that negativity in their life, those negative aspects of modern day life, day to day, boring ass life. You know what I mean? Like, yes, there's negative aspects of it and bad things happen to you, bad things happen to other people, blah, 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 that you may or may not be able to control. And we want to ignore that. We want to shove that into our shadow and focus on the positive, positive, positive. This can lead to negative positivity, which I won't talk about too much in this video, but it just the fact of that positive, positive, positive can actually lead to negative. So you need to have that balance. It's not black and white. It never will be. You need to embrace both aspects. And this is going to lead into why I think, these are all my personal opinions, shadow work has become so popular since mid 2020. I want to say around the summertime is where I really noticed this topic really picking up traction on different social media sites, different spiritual websites, etc. So, because you need to have the negative and the positive to have balance, but we don't like to focus on the negative. And we've done a lot of things in our society, in our modern society, to ignore the fact that negative things exist. We have a lot of distractions. And I mean, we've done it on purpose. We enjoy them. They're enjoyable things. Just we've used them as a society overall as distractions. Number one is TV. TV, movies, entertainment in general. And this is also talking about, I'm also adding like music festivals and things like that. These are all entertainment based, which, don't get me wrong, I love TV. I watch a lot of TV, but there's a difference between using TV for entertainment and using TV as a distraction. I have used TV as a distraction in the past where I didn't want to do any of my responsibilities and I would actively ignore my responsibilities to immerse myself into a TV show or into a movie, whatever, and using it full stop as a complete distraction. And a lot of people do this. A lot of people do this. Some people do it out of necessity. They're in a situation where they can't do anything else. I think of my grandfather who had very limited mobility. He couldn't do a lot of things, so he watched a lot of TV. And yes, that's a form of escape, but it's escape from the situation that is so negative. You know what I mean? So the outside situation was so negative, he's using it as a positive to gain a little bit of balance in his kind of mental well-being or in his life, just due to those limitations. For me, for example, I could do just about anything that I wanted in my physical life, but because of different responsibilities and my mental just kind of like situation at that time, like my mental health at that time, I was using it as a full escape from what I needed to face in the real world. Another form of escapism is just recreational things in general. So like outdoor activities that are like not health or wellness based. So like if you're doing outdoor sports or things like that, like even like skiing or snowshoeing, like that kind of stuff. I know it's winter, so I'm thinking of it. That's more for like it's entertainment. It can be definitely for entertainment, but it also has a wellness aspect to it, right? You're doing physical activity. But I'm talking about sitting around on a campfire, drinking. That's escapism. Going to theme parks, going to, different outdoor activities that are just based on entertainment. So I'm thinking of like doing zip lining and, whitewater rafting in a big group, stuff like that. Yes, there can be physical components to it, but the main purpose is entertainment based. One thing that I also think of is hotels, and I don't mean just like regular hotels. I mean like themed hotels that immerse you in this, fantastical location, or some of them are just completely fantasy based. You know what I mean? Like it's not even like they're imitating anything, it's just completely fantasy based. Some of these as well can also fall under the category of doing role-playing games. And yes, they can be fun and they can be a group activity, like it can be a social activity, which obviously has its pluses, but you're still immersing yourself in a fantasy world, and you're role-playing in a fantasy world, and that is a form of escapism. Now, I'm not saying that you can't do any of these activities, that they're all bad and they're all just fooling you or something like that. That's not true. The problem is when you do nothing else. The problem comes when that's all you do, is do these escapism activities, and you don't, face or deal with the problems that you have in your day-to-day life. That's when it becomes a problem. And part of that is integrating your shadow and being aware of your shadow. And in that instance, you can really focus and understand on why you want to do those activities. Is it for pure entertainment value and you do it a healthy amount of time? Then awesome, do that. It's not a problem. But if you kind of really evaluate yourself and you notice that you're overusing it and using it primarily as an escapism tool, then you need to reevaluate what you're doing and why you're doing it. A part of why the shadow self develops is through our cultural norms and our cultural expectations of each other and what's considered socially acceptable and socially desirable. The desirable part is definitely a big key. So when you think of our modern society, what's socially desirable? You need to have a nice house, nice car, go on vacation, have the perfect family, have the perfect spouse, have the perfect job, etc., etc., etc. That is what's considered desirable in our modern Western society. On top of that, there's obviously, I can't get into all of the like moral expectations and different personality traits that are considered, you know, acceptable slash desirable in our society. But I think you can have a pretty good guess on what some of those things would include. Because I'm sure as I am talking about it, some of those things are just popping naturally into your head. And this is where the majority of our shadow actually comes from. Because wanting to do something individually or have individualism is very, very scary and frowned upon in our society. And this is why the majority of our shadow even exists, is because of this. When we're growing up, developing as a person, and trying to discover who we are as individual people, we learn pretty quickly in our society that you need to step in line or you're going to be left behind, or you're going to be considered an outsider, different, etc. And as a, you know, species that relies on group and herd mentality for survival, that is something you do not want. So we do what we can to not have that happen to us. It's a survival instinct to some degree. But anyway, how do we accomplish this? 100% through consumerism and our daily activities. So things that we consider desirable for our personality trait is what we wear. What we wear, how we do our hair, our makeup, different activities that we do. So going out for lunch with the girls is a desirable activity. Going to the bar, going to nightclubs, and that's how you're going to interact socially. Even if it's just hanging out with friends at home, we need to do some type of activity. We're going to be watching a movie or playing a game, or just, you know, generally having conversation, or a dinner party or whatever. But there's different aspects of consumerism tied into that. And and I mean, obviously you can have social interactions that don't rely on any of that kind of stuff, but I want to focus on that because it's important to why shadow work has been so high now. The reason is all of that went away. At the beginning of 2020, all of our escapism activities, for the most part, went away. Our escapism into work, people had to work from home. Our escapism into going to different events and activities, that went away. On top of that, yes, entertainment was still there. We had TV, you could still access all that kind of stuff, but nothing new was happening. You could watch the old stuff, but nothing new was coming out. And a big part of that is we were all put on hold. And I mean, we're a year now, it's just about March next week. So we're hitting a year of doing this. And when your escapism activities or tools are gone, there's nothing left but reality. And reality can be really scary. That's why we like our escapism tools. That's why we gravitate to them and play the rat race game, because it keeps us very busy and it keeps our mind focused on what's ahead and what we want, and not what is right in front of us. At the beginning of last year, all of us were rudely forced to look at reality, and we had to face it head on. We had no choice. And for a lot of people, that was very scary. And for a lot of people, it really shook up their minds, because there's people who go their entire lives without facing their shadow. They go their entire lives living on autopilot and not really addressing, you know, their psychological drives and what makes them them and their full personalities. And that's fine for those people. But when you're in a situation where the distractions are gone and the coping mechanisms are gone, you have no choice but to face it. And a lot of people lashed out. You know exactly the people I'm talking about. People lashed out, and they're still lashing out. We're a year in, and people are still lashing out because they do not want to deal with it. They want their escapism back. They want to live the status quo that they've been living for 30, 50, 60 years just fine in their mind, hiding from reality. The reason that the subject of shadow work has come up so much is because people are forced to do it. When everything is gone and you have to face your own reality and what you have in your life and what you don't, you really need to look at your shadow, because when those things are gone, you have to really evaluate, were they important? When you lose your job and you have to really think about what you spend your money on, you are forced to reevaluate what you value. And part of that is your shadow, because that's where all of that is driven from. So many people were forced to do shadow work without even realizing it. All they knew is that they were just in this deep darkness and being forced to reevaluate themselves and having a really hard time with it. So I think this is why a lot of people who are aware of spiritual work and work with spiritual work in the shadow work category has really been pushing it out. And I'm also seeing people that are kind of discovering it also pushing out information, because we're forced to do it, and everybody is in the same boat right now, unfortunately, but that is what it is. But the positive part of that is we're faced to look at reality. We're faced to really evaluate what our politicians are doing, the different social movements that are, they've been fighting for years. They're being highlighted because we can't hide anymore. We can't hide it. It's in our faces. There's nothing distracting us. There's no new entertainment distracting us. There's no news about fluff shit that doesn't matter, because there is none happening. We can't go out to dinner. We can't go to any recreational activities that involve other people. So we have nothing else than to look at ourselves. And yes, that has some negative aspects. Mental health, for example, has been in a big decline. The mental health aspects in our hospital and resources are being very overrun. And that's just kind of going to go part with it, unfortunately. But overall, people are really having to face themselves. And I don't think it's necessarily a negative thing. We just really need to hope that after all this is done, people have done enough shadow work and integrated their shadow enough that we just don't go back. We can't. We can't go back to the escapism to the level that we were at, because all of this sacrifice and all of this, mental anguish that we're kind of having to be forced to go through will be for nothing if we just go back. We need to really evaluate what our values are, what our true desires are, and what's really important, and keep that moving forward. Yes, bring back the entertainment. I want to go back. I want to go to the movies again. I want to go to music festival again, but use it for that. Use it for entertainment, having a fun weekend, not going to every music festival in the summertime because you're escaping, your dead-end job, or you're escaping your responsibilities. All right, so this is my final look that I have done here. I know it kind of got a little dark at the end there, but it's going to end up being positive in the end. If you feel like you're being forced to do the shadow work, there's lots of resources online and information about it. Just making sure that you don't get sucked into any, charlatan stuff. You know what I mean? But yeah, take care of yourselves. Take care of your mental health. If you need help, reach out for it. There's no shame, and there's definitely resources available wherever you live. And yeah, make friends with your shadow self. You become such a whole person, and I cannot express how better I feel and how better I handle negative situations in my life because I've integrated my shadow. I still have a lot of work to do. You have to work on it for the rest of your life, but it definitely can make you a lot more whole of a person and understand why you do things and why you want to do things. And my next video in this format will be about witchcraft and sexuality.